I'm Stephen Bader. I'm the Executive Director of the East Bay Economic Development Alliance, as we call it, East Bay EDA. Thrilled to have you here at our 2019 spring membership meeting here at the Oakland Asian Cultural Center here in Oakland. I'm going to call up our chair, the Honorable Supervisor Keith Carson, to get us going in today's program. Let's give him a hand.
Good morning. When Stephen said good morning, everybody was still kind of asleep. But I'm sure that Dr. Christopher Thornburg will wake everybody up with the information he's going to give us today. I want to welcome all of you to East Bay Economic Development's 2019 spring membership meeting, our meeting which we host and look forward to every single year. It's one of the meetings that we have that we extend an outdoor invitation to the community at large to attend. Otherwise, most of our meetings that we host during the course of the year are kind of specific to a tailored audience. So again, I want to say thanks to all of you for being here this morning and welcome. You're going to learn a lot about not only the organization before we have the information on the economic forecast, but you're also going to see some of the good things that East Bay EDA has done over the last year. As I said this morning, you're going to hear from the indicators and the trends of the East Bay region for what's going on from the renowned Dr. Christopher Thornburg, and you're also going to hear from Anish Raman, Senior Advisor to the California Governor Gavin Newsom, Office of Business and Economic Development, and want to say thanks very much for being with us today. As the chair of this organization, I act as one of the many officers who really run this organization on a regular basis, and an incredible executive committee that meets at least 4 times a year, as well as in a retreat session, which will be coming up pretty soon, to kind of chart out the mission and the things that we're going to do each and every year. So at this point, I'm going to ask my fellow executive committee members to please stand and be recognized. Those who are fellow executive committee members, would you all please stand? You know who you are, so. I want you to remain standing because of those of you who also take on an added responsibility. Executive board members, stand please. One more time. But also, how many of you serve also as co-chairs and take on an added leader responsibility? Please raise your hand. And I want people to recognize those who do the heavy lifting. Also, I'm going to ask that our staff, our incredible staff, also stand so that they can be recognized. We don't host these events without having incredible sponsors, and so today's sponsor is Bank of America, and I want to say a big thank you to Bank of America for being the sponsor of the event today. The Senior Vice President and Market Manager for Commercial Banking, Robert Lucheski, is going to speak a little bit later on in the program, and representing Bank of America. So we also have some special supporters for this event because of the fact that we put out an economic forecast and we also put out economic indicator report. And in order for us to be able to put out these reports each year, which you'll be able to pick up on the way out, I want to thank the Alameda County Workforce Development and the Alameda County Social Service Agency, the Workforce Development Board of Contra Costa County, and once again, I want to thank Bank of America. Not only will you leave here with a lot of updated information, but there will be an opportunity at the end of today's program to receive a possible pair of tickets to fly any place in the country that Southwest flies, including Hawaii and Puerto Rico. And that's because Southwest Airlines, which is also one of our members, is giving away these 2 tickets. But you got to be present to win. So keep that in mind. I don't want to assume that everybody knows a lot about East Bay EDA, even though we've been in existence for 25 years. I don't want to be presumptuous about it. But we're a very unique organization that works with and have on our executive committee a number of high-level decision makers, not only in the area of business, which we do in both Contra, Costa, and Alameda County, but also we have leaders in labor, in the philanthropic community, in academia. We also have the community-based organizations. And as you see, a number of elected leaders are also a part of this organization, all kind of working together to make sure that we put forth the best strategies to attract and to retain business here in the East Bay to keep a vibrant economic community that we have. And so as a result of a lot of hours that are invested by our 153 engaged members serving on the committees that oversee these incredible areas that have an impact on everyone's life in this region. Outside of that, a number of our members also serve on regional and statewide boards and commissions, also at the table helping to decide and make decisions that impact this area. East Bay EDA also hosts a number of events during the course of the year. How many of you attended our 2019 Innovations Award? Raise your hands high. For those who haven't had a chance to attend the Innovations Award, is one of our signature events that we host at the Fox Theater each and every year. We highlight businesses in the East Bay that have advanced some kind of innovation, advanced some kind of innovative product and or thought. It's almost like the Academy Awards of the business community, and it's a fun event, but it's one in which it gives us a lot of a perspective on the diversity of work that's going on in this area and the outcomes from that work. So I'm going to encourage you to look forward to 2020 Innovation Award at the Fox. Those things sell out real quickly, and so that's important that you're there. We also produce a lot of material during the course of the year. We do a lot of research and analysis and advance that information to cities and to businesses and to other public entities that are interested in that. And so we want to make sure that you follow us as we come up with ongoing, up-to-date, in real-time information that's important. We also will have at the back the East Bay Book of Lists, which is a directory, and it's free. It highlights the business services that are available both online and in print. And so every year around December, we publish that East Bay book, and so look forward to that. Our robust social media messaging kind of keeps everybody updated in real time on what's going on. And so those issues that we get involved in, as well as legislative issues, a number of people have been a part of the delegation that not only goes to Sacramento but to Washington to make sure that we lobby on behalf of the critical issues that have a direct and an indirect impact to the citizens, not only in the Bay Area but throughout California. And so keep attention to that. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy day for being with East Bay EDA this morning. I'm sure that you will not only have a wealth of information once you leave today, but we're asking that you also share that information with your network to let people know firsthand what's taking place with respect to the East Bay, making this the best place to work, live, and do business. Now it's my pleasure to bring to the podium Robert Lucheski. He's the Senior Vice President and Marketing Manager for Bank of America. Please help me in welcoming Robert to the podium. Thank you very much.
So if I start off by saying good morning, everybody, am I going to get a better reception than we did over here? So I don't think I need to say my name again because it's up there on the screen. But thank you for having me here today. It really is an honor and a pleasure for me to be able to take a couple of minutes to speak with you today. Bank of America has a long history in the San Francisco and East Bay market, and I think a lot of you may know our story, starting with A.P. Giannini and the Bank of Italy in San Francisco in 1904, but we're very proud to have such a strong heritage here locally. We work with institutional, business, and individual customers across 8 lines of business. So it's pretty safe to say that regardless of your financial need or financial position, there's a banker we have that has something to talk to you about. The way we're organized, and I mentioned we have 8 different individual lines of businesses, but the way we're organized is around a community network. And here in our community, which is Alameda and Costa County, as well as San Francisco and Solano counties, we serve the communities through 111 branches, 484 ATMs, and we have 4,200 associates that all work here and live locally. We strongly believe that building strong, vibrant communities is critical to economic growth, and this belief helps us fulfill our purpose, which is to make financial lives better through every connection. We believe that if individuals thrive, then communities can thrive, and that's how at Bank of America we feel we'll be successful as well. Here's a few statistics that I'd like to share with you then about how we're helping to make communities better. Since 2014, our associates have volunteered 176,000 hours at local nonprofits. Individually, we've contributed an aggregate of $5.2 million to nonprofit organizations and community-based organizations. Bank of America is a matching program, so the bank has matched part of that. But in addition, Bank of America Charitable Foundation has made an additional $20 million in grant funds available to nonprofit organizations as part of our efforts to build pathways to economic progress by addressing community development, workforce development, and basic health and human service needs in our communities. Another thing that I want to touch on is an article or as an announcement you may have all heard about 4 or 6 weeks ago, where Bank of America decided to nationally raise our minimum hourly wage to $17 an hour starting May 1st, with a further commitment to raise it to $20 by 2021. And for this reason, thank you. And for this reason and some of the other programs we have to help our individual associates, Bank of America was recently named the top 100 companies to work for by Fortune magazine, and we're very proud of that. Now, I can also share some other statistics around what we do in the markets, which is around small business lending and mortgage lending and assets under management and all that sort of stuff. But I figure I'd leave all that fun banking stuff to our esteemed speaker who I'm about to introduce. Chris Thornburg is a legend. If you haven't heard him speak before, you're going to find out what I mean. And if you have heard him speak before, you already do know what I mean. Chris founded Beacon Economics in 2006, and his firm has become one of the most respected research organizations in California. Chris also serves as the director of the UC Riverside School of Business Center for Economic Forecasting and Development. Don't leave. He's an expert in economic forecasting, economic policy, and labor and real estate market economics. He may be the only economist with a magic crystal ball, as he became nationally known for forecasting the subprime mortgage market crash in 2007 and was one of the few economists on record who predicted the global economic recession that followed. And on days when his magic crystal ball isn't working, he can always rely on his PhD in economics from the Anderson School of UCLA to help him synthesize all the market data and package it into practical, understandable, and witty insights that we can all use to help us invest our money, run our businesses, and plan our capital expenditures. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Thornburg.
Now, good morning. All right, just testing my microphone there. By the way, to be clear, when he said legend, what he meant by that is that there's no proof of my existence except for a couple of fuzzy photos of my head sticking out of a lock in Scotland. Okay, that's it. That's it. So no pictures, okay? No proof. Okay, we're waiting for this to come up. It is nice to be back. You know, I typically spend some time giving accolades about my deep history, studying the East Bay, really since I was still with UCLA prior to the Great Recession, which is ancient history in some ways. And yet, you know, here we are today in, without a doubt, one of the most extraordinarily powerfully growing economies in the nation. And yet, in so many ways, the conversations I'm having today seem to be the same conversations I've had for the same decade. You know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I think you're going to find a lot of the themes of the conversation this morning really wrapped around that. But of course, as always, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start from the big and work my way down to the more local regions and talk about a number of these topics. And from a big perspective, we know, of course, that there's a lot of pessimism in the air, right? Yeah, as you know, over the last few years, I've been here reasonably optimistic, talking about the fundamental strengths of the economy. We are just a couple months away from this being the longest expansion in U.S. economic history. And boy, with the spring, the bears come out, don't they? It's, you know, out of hibernation, and every time you turn around, it's yet another negative headline. Here's just kind of a sampling of them. U.S. economy is strong, 3 sides won't last. Housing is already in a slump. Economy at very real risk of falling into recession by late 2020, the UCLA forecast says. Those guys haven't been the same since I left, you know what I mean? Really? You know, and it's funny because you remember back in the day when I was coming up here and I was talking about the Great Recession and how I was worried about things, and all this, you know, miserableism, right? You know, kind of brings me back to what I was talking about back then. Now, we all know, of course, a lot of the pessimism started with the big stock market decline that occurred roughly November, December of last year. You remember the huge sell-off, almost 20% decline by the time the market hit the bottom. And we yet again get sucked into the myth of the stock market that knows all, sees all, predicts all. All hail the mighty market. And it brings me back in time because we obviously had an enormous stock market sell-off in the midst of the Great Recession. When did that stock market sell-off actually occur? And the answer is September of 2008. That's just after Lehman Brothers failed and Congress said no to the big investment bank bailout, and all of a sudden the stock market dove 800 points in a day, the single largest decline in the stock market in one day ever. But what's interesting about all that is that all occurred in September 2008. The recession actually began in December 2007, 9 months earlier. Well, where was the stock market for the first half of the Great Recession? Well, of course, they were in largely denial of what was going on. Stock market doesn't drive recessions. The stock market doesn't predict recessions. The stock market is an extremely warped reflection of the economy and becoming more warped over time, as the case may be. Forget about the stock market. In fact, in a lot of ways, forget about the financial markets. Recessions begin with imbalances in the real world. It's incredibly important to remember. And when you think about what happened prior to the Great Recession, we had an economy that was really out of whack. You know, back then, in the run-up to the Great Recession, we have a complete breakdown in basic underwriting standards, particularly in the consumer debt markets. That, of course, caused an enormous flood of subprime credit to flow into the markets and flow into households, and that drove all sorts of problems. The housing market exploded, not only from a price perspective, but from a pace of construction perspective. We were building vastly more houses than the nation actually needed. And of course, consumers took all that housing wealth and easy credit to heart, and you saw savings rates drop to a really dangerously low level. It was not a healthy economy underneath the surface, as good as the numbers were in 2006. It was only a function of time towards those real world imbalances collapsed, snapped back, and created, of course, what we called the Great Recession. Far from being the first domino in the chain, the collapse in the stock market was the last domino in the chain. They were the last guys to figure out how bad things really were. And it's so intriguing because when you think about back then and how obvious it was and all the people who were completely missing it, and then you come back to today where everybody's screaming to the end of the world, and my question is, why? Look, last year was a great year, 3% growth. We had another 3% growth quarter coming into this year. Good, solid trends. You look at the underlying details, labor markets, consumer spending, investment, wages, exports, energy, home production, debt level. Everything's on safe, steady, sustainable paths. There's nothing wrong out there. There's no major imbalances. we are going to slow down a little bit. There's no doubt about it. But that all goes back to what happened at the end of 2017, where Congress, of course, passed a fiscal stimulus plan. They called it a tax plan. It wasn't. It was fiscal stimulus. They cut taxes and increased government spending. That's fiscal stimulus. And all by itself, that's bizarre. Fiscal stimulus? That's what you use in a recession, not in a full employment, late expansion economy. But they did it anyway. And so, yeah, it did heat up the economy, and fiscal stimulus, it fades away. So we're going to slow down a little bit, but that's okay. Chance of recession the next 2 years, still really low. I know, puts me on the outside, right? I'm the radical on this one, right? Everybody points this out, the Wall Street Journal next recession poll. 60% of the economists agree the next recession is going to be 2020. 90% said it's going to be by 2021. Scary stuff. But then again, this is the 2018 poll. The 2017 poll said the next recession was going to be in 2019. And the 2016 one said it was going to be in 2018, right? The good news is, according to the Wall Street Journal next recession poll, the next recession is always 2 years away. I'll take it, right? But more importantly is this. Look, if you actually fill out this survey, you are proven you're not qualified to fill out this survey. For the simple reason they don't give you the actual answer you need to give someone who asks you this question. Look, I have almost 20 years of forecasting experience. I have a PhD from UCLA. You want to know what the honest answer is to when the next recession is going to be? A lot of technical detail here. Bear with me. You ready? Oh. I don't know. That's the only answer you can give. It's not the when, it's the why. You've got to have a why. Anybody who says, when's the next recession going to occur? The answer is I don't know, because I don't have a reason for a recession to occur. If you don't have a reason, it ain't going to happen. Simple as that. So if you don't have a why, there is no when. And this survey is ridiculous because they insist on a when. Now, things aren't great. I understand. There's always issues in economies. In this time, we have labor shortages, housing shortages, market volatility, rising long-run rates, an overly aggressive Fed, a flat yield curve, sharp growth in government deficits. We have global trade security worries. We got this huge trade war with China. I get all that. There's always stressors in the economy. My professional opinion is none of these will cause a recession. Not yet. Again, will they? Will they get worse? Could they get to the point of maybe creating a recession? Sure. That's why you invite me back every year. That doesn't cause recessions. It doesn't cause recessions. It doesn't cause recessions. And by the way, your numbers aren't right. Yeah, they're not. And we'll come back to that. I'm not sure I put the slide in there, but remember to ask that question again. But again, to your point, those kind of imbalances don't cause recessions. Recessions are driven by imbalances such as people spending too much and building too many homes, because those imbalances can't go on. And then when they snap and we go from producing 2.2 million units per year and it collapses to 300,000 units a year, that's what causes a recession. When people pull back on their spending by 10% on average, that causes a recession. It's dramatic, sharp, quick moves in the economy that cause recessions. The kind of long-run forces, whether it's wealth inequality, income inequality, the boomers retiring, these are slow changes. They aren't the rapid changes that create recessions, that create those temporary instabilities. It's a different kind of process. So it isn't to say that isn't a problem we need to deal with. There's lots of long-run problems. And yes, long-run problems can create short-run imbalances that in turn can create recessions. But remember, recessions, those short-run periods of disequilibrium where we see unemployment go up and the economy slow down, that's driven by short-run shocks to the system. So they're different kind of issues. Always focus on the different kinds of issues. For me, the biggest problem is politics, political dysfunction. And that's, again, been the same kind of conversation I've given you for the last few years. Look at D.C. today. You have people who are not focusing on true long problems. Wealth inequality, healthcare cost inflation, pension entitlement reform. No one's talking about these issues. Everybody's running around with their hair on fire with a story as to why our economy is collapsing around our ears right now. And that's Not happening. But of course, by running around with your hair on fire, screaming end of the world, you get to dodge the long run issues, which, by the way, are easily solvable, but it requires something called compromise. It requires something called conversation. And no one in D.C. wants to do that. And you know, we had a big election last November, and I know some people are really happy with what happened in Congress, some people are really unhappy. Here's what I know. I don't care who's running Congress right now. What I know is there are fewer centrists in D.C. today than there were a year ago. And that is a scary trend, because this is not one party or another. It's both parties that are devolving into this craziness. So focus on the real issues as opposed to focusing on these wrong issues. So let's get into some of the data. As always, lots of numbers, too many slides. Here we go. GDP right now growing about 3% in real terms on a year-over-year average. Last year was a great year, 3% growth. Every part of the U.S. economy did better in 2018. Consumer spending grew faster. Business investment grew faster. Exports grew faster. Government spending grew faster. The only part of the economy that was weak last year was, of course, residential real estate. Now, the first quarter number came in, and that was another 3% growth. Now, that 3% wasn't as good as it looked. There was actually a pretty sharp slowdown in consumer spending, a big slowdown in business investment. What really pushed that number up was temporary increases in inventories and a big decline in imports. And that was driven by some of the weirdnesses of the Q1, whether it was a slowdown after a hot Q4, and of course, don't forget we had the government shutdown. Real growth in the first quarter is probably running about 2%, which is a little bit more reasonable. And it's where I think we're going to be most of the year, 2 to 2.5% range. But again, relatively good numbers. Focus on consumers. Consumers are important. 70% of the economy. If the consumer's healthy, they can push the U.S. economy through a lot of other problems. If the consumer is out of whack, there is enormous problems. They will magnify any shock to the system. So where's the consumer? Doing great. Overall spending heated up a little bit towards the end of last year, getting close to 3% year on year. But more important, on the right-hand side is the savings rate. No diminishment in savings. Savings are running at a nice, consistent 6 to 7%. People are spending money they are earning. This is great news. This is great news. People are not getting ahead of themselves. Same thing in terms of debt. Overall debt levels, well, consumer debt is rising. It's rising slower than incomes. And as a result of that, debt-to-income ratios are falling. Because of the fact that we have low interest rates, that the financial obligation ratio is near an all-time low level. American households look financially about as healthy as they've been in a very long time. And again, a stable consumer sector is so important for our economy because it can push us through a whole lot of other issues. Home sales, okay, they slowed a bit. There's no doubt about it. We went from 5.5 million units down to 5 million. Overall median price growth went from 6% down to 4%. Now, it has slowed down, but let's be careful. A slowing housing market is not a collapsing housing market. Let me demonstrate. Let's go back to the run-up before the Great Recession, and you can see, look at the collapse from 2005 to 2007. Look what happened to sales. It went from, this is single-family homes, went from 6.2 million down below 4 million within 2 years. Explosion in inventories because everybody who had borrowed money they couldn't afford to pay back on that musical chair game called subprime borrowing, those folks were underwater already, and they were so desperate to get rid of their homes, inventories exploded. Here we are right now. This is the last 2 years. Yeah, a tiny decrease in sales, and inventories barely budged. This is not a collapsing housing market, and certainly doesn't lead to or drive anything that would look like a downturn. But you might say, maybe not now, but maybe in a year, maybe two. Every collapsing housing market starts with a flat housing market. Well, my question is, again, as always, why? What are the fundamentals that drive that? It doesn't just happen. Something has to be out of whack. Something has to be broken in the system. It isn't supply. This is overall units on the left. Almost 2.2 million units at the peak in 2005. Vastly more than this nation needed given basic population growth. Last couple of years, it's been running 1.2 million. Some economists said that's not enough. I think it's just about right. Whatever the number is, here's the thing you should think about. There's no massive excess supply of homes out there to create any kind of major problems. Indeed, the number of units for sale and for rent right now is near a record low level in the U.S. economy. There's no major issues out there in this front. Same thing in terms of credit conditions. You know, on the back end of the Great Recession, they passed Dodd-Franks. Dodd-Franks had some good stuff in it, but it had a whole bunch of really lousy stuff, okay? And part of the lousy stuff was the incredible restrictions they put on the mortgage market that prevented all sorts of people from getting back into the housing market at the back end of the downturn. It was a terrible, terrible way of fixing the housing market because all these people who had gotten in, who got foreclosed on, never had another opportunity to buy a house when they should have been given that opportunity. Getting people back into home ownership would have been very helpful to helping the housing market get going again. But it didn't allow that to happen, right? It did not allow that to happen. Instead, ownership rates kept falling all the way through about 2 years ago, and it just now started to grow. This is not good long-run policy, but there's a silver lining. On the right-hand side is mortgage origination by credit score. And for the last decade, the median credit score for a mortgage borrower has been above 750. So households don't have a lot of debt. The debt they do have is about as clean as it could possibly be. There's no excess supply of homes. What's the problem? And the answer is there is none. So what caused the housing market to slow down? Interest rates. Interest rates started to shift up, and a little bit of psychology too. I'm sure a lot of people bought into the nonsense. Oh, here we go, another big housing cycle. Only thing I have to do is sit in my hands for 6 months, and I'll be able to buy a house at 10% off. Sorry, ain't going to happen because there's no these other imbalances there. Interest rates did come up, there's no doubt about it. But again, context is king. I always have to do this survey just a little bit. I get it. Everybody talks about interest rate. Last year they hit 5% mortgage rate. Whoa, that's the highest over the last 6 or 7 years. Now, to be clear, I'm a Gen Xer. Who's a Gen Xer out there? All right. If you're a Gen Xer, you know this story. If you're a Gen Xer, you had to listen to your father tell you 17 times a month about the 83% interest rate he paid on his mortgage in 1982, okay? And yes, he had to walk to school in the snow, both directions uphill at 8 miles. I get that, right? But there was some truth to that story. And of course, if you have a little context, interest rates were running 14, 15, 16% back then. Indeed, mortgage rates in 1987, which was a great year for housing, were running 10%. So higher interest rates will cause a market to slow down until it re-equilibrates. It doesn't kill a housing market. You just have to rebuild around it. So interest rates came up. We went through this rebuilding period. Simple as that. Now, why did interest rates come up? Well, for all the right reasons. Because we had more economic growth. We had more federal borrowing. We had strong equity markets. It wasn't because of the Fed. It wasn't because of a lack of capital. It wasn't driven by inflation. We just had a hotter economy, and interest rates going to go up in a hot economy. Simple as that. Now, since then, of course, things have slowed down just a bit. And don't forget, because of the stock market sell-off, we had a big bond market rally, and lo and behold, interest rates are now the lowest they've been in almost a year. In other words, second half of this year is going to be huge for housing. It's going to be a big bounce back. Forget all the negative numbers for Q1. It's completely temporary. It's going to bounce forward. And for all of you who are sitting on your hand waiting to buy that house, don't. Because it's only going to get more expensive, period. So what about Fed then? What have they been doing? Well, you know, it's interesting. They were tightening. Why? I don't know. I don't know. Well, inflation was the answer, right? Everybody's petrified of inflation. Why would you be scared of inflation? Well, last year it hit 2%. That's Fed target, okay? That's not a panic point. When the Fed finally hit their target after 7 years of subpar inflation, that's when you send a box of candy and a little congratulation notes. Hey, nice job. You don't stomp on the brakes, but that's what they did. And what's interesting about this, again, is there any chance of inflation? No. Money supply growth is about as weak as it's been since the Great Recession. Unless you have money supply growth, you can't have any kind of real inflation in the economy. I don't know what they were doing. But here's what did happen. So they were tightening. It was okay because 10-year bonds rate rising because of the hot economy. And then all of a sudden, stock market sold off, the bond market rallied, and lo and behold, 10-year rates dropped until, ba-boom, the inverted yield curve. Dum, dum, dum. Now, the inverted yield curve, for those of you not familiar with it, let me explain. This is the difference between long-run and short-run interest rates. When short-run interest rates are higher than long-run interest rates, that is called an inverted yield curve. And the reason that is significant is because Every recession for the last 40 years has been preceded by an inverted yield curve. It is one of the most consistent indicators of a recession. Uh-oh, what does that mean? Well, to get here, I want to pose some philosophical questions, okay? Things to think about tonight before you go to sleep, okay? And there's some serious things in my head at night. One of them is, does free will truly exist? In a Newtonian universe, does it? Can it? I don't know. Are we just products of randomness? Or is there some grander scheme? I don't know. Here's another one. Why is there a D in fridge but not refrigerator? That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Is there a synonym for synonym? I don't know. Here's one for the Gen Xers in the audience. What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? Anybody know the answer to this? African European, thank you very much. Xers rule, all right. And then, of course, last but not least, if the Fed inverts the yield curve and the economy is otherwise fine, will it cause a recession? And here the answer is no. So you can scratch this one off your list tonight, okay? Look, inverted yield curves don't cause recessions. Real imbalances do. The Great Recession was caused by the fact that we overbuilt, overborrowed, and overspent. In 2006, the yield curve inverted because the Federal Reserve was stomping on the brakes because they realized we were overbuilding, overborrowing, and overspending. So saying that inverted yield curve causes a recession is kind of like saying brakes caused the car to go over the cliff. No, the brakes were what they were trying to use to prevent the car from going over the cliff. They just didn't work. It's a different conversation, so forget about this. Just forget about it. Are there bubble issues out there? I don't know. Look, debt is still relatively high, but we are coming down. Debt to GDP ratios are actually falling right now in the U.S. economy. There are signs that there are inherent risks being taken in the markets, whether it's leverage loans or what do they call them, the high-yield debt stuff. Yeah, there's some signs of excessive risk being formed in the debt markets, but you don't see the real-world imbalances. So without the real-world imbalances, it just doesn't matter. We might get 5, 6 years, something real does happen, and we're going to find there's a lot of rot out there. I don't know. What I do know is it doesn't matter without the real-world imbalances. It's as simple as that. So what's up with the market? Who knows? This is the 6th major sell-off in the stock market since the Great Recession came to an end. 6. Typically in expansion, you'll have 1. 6. Why? High-speed trading. You know, the markets are not acting very well right now. They're all over the map. Periods of excessively smooth upward climbs in rates punctuated by these insane sell-offs. It makes no sense until you realize that there aren't traders anymore. There are only programmers. And programmers don't program on the basis of fundamentals. They program to beat other people's programs. We've turned the stock market into a video game. And we wonder why it acts weird. So, yeah, that is a problem. What isn't a problem is your actual investment in stocks. Because guess what? Corporate America is doing great. Corporate profits actually started to rise in 2018 after being flat for about 3 years. Because of the wonderful tax cuts they got, net profits are rising more. And that's why business investment has been nice and steady up to the first quarter. Businesses are making money, they're investing it, and that's really important for the Bay Area because you guys make a lot of the stuff that businesses buy to invest. So, a lot of good things here on that particular front. Industrial production has slowed just a little bit. Consumer products are down a bit. Motor vehicles are down 4%. Business supplies a little weak. Other things are up. High-tech's doing better. Materials kind of steady right now. But I tell you what, putting all this to one side, the slowdown is not being driven by exports. Yes, there's some internal issues here. Some of the throws on. It's kind of the never-ending flow. But exports did great last year. Q1, again, exports, record high level. And that's despite the fact the dollar's relatively strong. Our global markets are pretty good right now. And you've heard something about global slowdowns. Most of that's overstated. But of course, despite all this good news, we had the big trade war threat. And we talked about this last year. Remember, it all started with the famous tweet, trade wars are good and easy to win, and we need them because we have a trade deficit and everybody else's fault, and blah, 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 blah. And then it turns out it wasn't so easy to just win a trade war. Because the EU pointed that out when they said, oh, we can also do stupid, right? And they had a bunch of retaliatory tariffs, and we said, okay, that's all good. We're going to sit down, and we're going to give everybody waivers, and now we're backing off the tariffs on steel and aluminum, and we have a trade truce, and that's great. And then NAFTA, we ripped up the old one. Now we have a new one. It's exactly the same. Great, I don't care. So the only thing left is China. And, you know, I talked about this last year. I give a lot of credit to the administration for finally taking on the China situation. Look, China signed on to the WTO 20 years ago, and every single year since then, they've flagrantly violated the vast majority of the basic tenets of the WTO. And for some reason, everybody's so obsessed with making money in the short run, no one seems to care about the long-run detriment of the ongoing issues from those barriers they put into place. Whether it's stealing technology, not enforcing property rights, the unfair set of trade barriers that we don't apply to their products, someone had to stand up and say enough is enough. Gains for trade are something that we're both supposed to get, not just you. And we have to start playing fair. And so we did put some restrictions, and it's still going on. So the question is, how much is this going to hurt the economy? Well, there's two ways of thinking about that, exports and imports. Forget the exports. Yeah, I know some parts of the economy, whether you're talking about wine or you're talking about soy, there are some parts of the economy that are seeing dislocation, but it's not much. Look, only 7% of U.S. exports actually go to China. 7% is it. It's not a big number. The real number is 20% of our imports, which come from China. I mean, the balance between what we send over, what they send to us is enormous, but that's the rub. You see, 0.75% of our economy goes there on an annual basis, and the supply chains of that are fairly shallow, outside of a couple key industries like airplanes. On the other hand, 4% of the Chinese economy comes here, and those supply chains are deep. And remember, China is struggling right now. They're not in a recession, but they're not growing as fast as they used to. Our industrial production growth of theirs is pretty close right now. And they have an aging population. Their workforce isn't growing very rapidly. You have situations of corruption and inefficiencies. You have all sorts of issues in the midst of a big political consolidation. They don't want a trade war with the United States. They do not want a trade war with the United States. Simple as that. So what do? Well, we slapped a 10% tariff, and lo and behold, the yuan depreciated by about 13%. You remember how all those importers were telling you how expensive it was to buy stuff from China? No, it wasn't. Because the yuan depreciated by more than the actual tariff. They put a 25% tariff, and lo and behold, the yuan's starting to depreciate again. I don't know if it'll go 25%, maybe 15 or 16%. But the point here is this. Right now, the Chinese are making a calculated long-run strategy. Delay, delay, delay. They are willing to give up short-run profits to get past the Trump administration. And that is the game they're playing. That's why you don't even see it on imports. You don't even feel it. We imported more from China in 2018 with a 10% tariff than we did in 2017. And of course, again, I don't think it's going to be 25%. I don't think it'll be a full offset. But let's be clear what we're talking about, right? If you listen to the paper, what do they tell you? You know, if you see that $60 pair of pants from China, well, that's going to be 25% more expensive now. No. Look, Macy's will charge you $60 for a pair of pants. What do you think Macy's paid for those pants from their wholesaler in China? $6 maybe? Okay, so let me see. You're going to go from $6 to $7 for those pants. Are you really going to see it on the shelf in Macy's? Probably not so much, okay? So let's keep thinking context. This is an interesting long-run game. It is not a short-run phenomenon. There will be a little dislocation here and there, but there's nothing terribly scary about this. It's being so overhyped in the press, I can't even begin to tell you. So keep an eye on it. Very interesting, but it's not a threat. Why do they do it? Well, the same answer as always, jobs, 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 right? Jobs, jobs, jobs. Now, mind you, we've been adding jobs to this economy for 10 years straight. Where are we right now? The unemployment rate in the U.S. is at 3.6%, the lowest it's been in 40 years. The job openings rate is 4.7%. We have more job openings in the U.S. economy than there are people looking for work. Can we stop with the jobs, jobs, jobs conversation? We don't need jobs. We need people to fill jobs. And by the way, that's having great impacts on the economy, particularly on the labor force. Forget this idea that wages aren't going up. That's nonsense, complete nonsense. Left-hand side, these are real wage gains for continuously employed full-time workers. The average has been running close to 4%. The median has been running close to 2%. From a wage perspective, this is one of the strongest expansions in real incomes we've seen in a long time. And this doesn't capture all of it. This is take-home pay. It doesn't include the cost of benefits, whether it's health care or various government benefits or other employer benefits. None of that's in these numbers. People are making money. That's why consumer spending is going up. But you might say, hey, it's good they're finally getting ahead, but they got a lot of making up to do. Why is that? Well, hey, look, this is some scary stuff right here. What is it? Well, in 2017, the real median income for a male worker in the United States was $40,000. In inflation-adjusted terms, in 1973, the wages for a median male worker were $40,000. Real incomes for the median male worker hasn't gone up in 45 years, folks. Stop. Does that sound right to you? Just think about this statement. And by the way, this is going to be a centerpiece of the Democratic conversation coming up to this next election. When the 327 Democrats running for president get on the stage, I guarantee this will come up multiple times. But let's think about this just for a second. Ed, I was 6 years old in 1973. You were like 20 or 25 or something, right? So, was 1973 that good? No. 73 sucked. I cannot believe that people are fetishizing 1973 like it was so wonderful. Let me give you a couple examples. In 1973, life expectancy was less than 68 years. Today, it's 76. Infant mortality has gone from 1.7 down to 0.5. Crime rates are down. Percent of the population with a degree is up. We live longer, safer, healthier, more educated. Where is this in the data? The answer is it's not, because these don't end up in the numbers. Nowhere in your income data does it talk about the fact that you live longer and healthier and you're safer. That's not counted. And that's a huge problem. And that, of course, has to do with the fact that inflation, as we measure it, is trying to measure the change in the price of a basket of goods on a year-to-year basis. That's not a reasonable way to calculate quality of life. It's not. And we need to stop pretending it is. People are vastly better off than they were 30 or 40 years ago. They're vastly better off than they were 10 years ago. And this doesn't even touch on it. Because there's a whole other problem with the data, which is technological change that we don't capture in any real way. Here's something simple. A smartphone. Smartphone. Everybody has a smartphone. 85% of Americans have a smartphone. 85%. That means only people under the age of 7 and people who can't see don't have smartphones. Everybody else has a smartphone. Do you know how old a smartphone is? 10 years, 11 years. 11 years old. The first smartphone came out, true smartphone in the modern sense, came out in 2007. We still live the Great Recession like it's right here, yet somehow or other we all assume we had a smartphone in our pocket all the time. By the way, it's not just America. A buddy of mine came back from Bangladesh, countryside. He was doing charity work. No place poorer on the planet than the countryside of Bangladesh. You know what everybody in the countryside of Bangladesh has? A smartphone. Now again, you might say, so what? What an interesting trinket. It's not an interesting trinket. With your little smartphone, you can communicate with anybody in the world for free at any point in time. Anybody in the world, in video. You have unlimited access to entertainment, unlimited access to information. You can talk to doctors. You can talk to political leaders. You can organize politically. This thing is insanely powerful, and everybody on the damn planet has one. And economists have no idea how to put that in the GDP statistics. No idea. So we don't, and we ignore it. We pretend it doesn't exist. You can't pretend this doesn't exist. You can't pretend how amazing this and how much it's changed the world. To put this in context, what did a cell phone look like in 1973? Something like that. Your phone has a few additional advantages. And to be clear, there's one other thing that's nice. Your phone doesn't smell like urine. But it's not just this. I mean, cars today. No one drives a Hyundai. I wouldn't drive a Hyundai. Why not? This thing is chock full of technology. Anybody can buy one of these things, and you got airbags and Bluetooth and sensors and everything. Here's a car in 1973, ugly at any speed, horrible. A TV today, TV 1973. Online shopping today, online shopping 1973. You got Encyclopedia Today, Encyclopedia 1973. Was anything better in the 1970s? Anything? John Travolta was better in 1970. Everything else was worse. Stop playing these games. People are so well off today. We are so rich. Yeah, we don't count it in the numbers, but the vast majority of Americans are so much better off than they were today. Now, what about the inequality issue? Yeah, there's inequality, but not the kind of inequality you think. Bernie Sanders loves to talk about income inequality. He forgets taxes paid and benefits received. Once you account for those, the measures of income inequality haven't moved in 10 years, 15 years. They haven't moved. What does scare the heck out of me is wealth inequality. Top 1% of Americans own 40% of all wealth we know of. Top 0.1% of them own the lion's share of that. Yeah, that is scary. When fewer and fewer people have more and more, when 80% of political donations come from 1% of Americans, that's terrifying. And it is scary, not because we need to worry about the person in the street. The person in the street has never had it as good as they do right now, ever. But from a long-run perspective, this is dangerous because of the political instabilities it builds into the system, which is exactly what you're seeing in Washington, D.C. right now. So yeah, it is scary. We need to do something about it. By the way, the $15 an hour minimum wage is completely useless. And if you're spending your time running around screaming for a $15 an hour minimum wage, you're not helping the problem. In fact, you're hurting it because you're not focusing your energies on what really matters. And this really matters, and it doesn't get cured by a minimum wage. It gets cured by major changes in tax policy at the federal level. No one's even talking about it. What is the bigger issue? Lack of workforce growth. Why is that? Demographics. You know, baby boomers are aging, and they're retiring now. And millennials are the biggest generation ever. They're only 1% bigger than the boomers, 2% bigger. That's it. Over the next 10 years, it's going to get worse. We're going to have 22 million more Americans, of which 18 million are 65 plus. For the next 30 years, 60 million more Americans, of which 35 million are going to be 65 plus. If you're thinking over the next 10 years about your business and growth, focus on the boomers. Retiring boomers, as simple as that. There's another issue, of course, what it's doing to the federal government budget. And, you know, it brings me to this. I showed you this a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, the CBO put out a wonderful survey. How do you make the U.S. economy grow faster? We want to make it grow faster. What do? Well, number one was enact the immigration reform to increase the number of workers. Has anybody seen the new immigration reform bill? Going the other way. Reform the income tax code. We didn't have reform, we have fiscal stimulus. Oh, how about increase the Social Security retirement age by 2 years? That's an obvious one. What are the Democrats talking about? Expanding Social Security benefits. What? The retired generation today is richer than any generation of retirees ever. They're twice as rich as people were 30 years ago. Millennials are falling behind. The boomers, richest generation ever. And we want to expand the benefits for them? What are we doing? And of course, last but not least, reduce deficits. Our fiscal stimulus increased it by $3 trillion. Top 4 things we need to do to help our economy grow. And Congress and the President are attempting or have done the exact opposite. That scares me. It tells you just how out of control policy is, how disconnected it is from reality. Now, where are things good? This is unemployment on a state-by-state basis back in August of last year. Lighter or darker color, what's a higher unemployment rate? What do you think? Darker is a higher unemployment rate. The lowest unemployment rates in the country in the Midwest. You know why? No one wants to live there. Exactly right. This is net migration. And this is important. This is important. Listen, right now, growth in the United States is driven by where people are moving. We're labor constrained. Unemployment is low everywhere. So where people move is where places will grow. What does this say? People are moving to Oregon, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, South Carolina, Washington, Montana, Colorado, Tennessee, North Carolina. People are moving there, and that would suggest those places are growing faster. And yeah, that's exactly what's happening. Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Nevada, Florida, these are the places with the best output growth and the best, of course, job growth. The one exception to that is California. California is a weird place. People are moving out, and we're the hottest economy out there. I wonder why. Could be that thing we've talked about incessantly for the last 15 years, housing, right? Look, California's great. More jobs than ever. California's share of national personal income have never been higher. Median real wage growth in the West, which is basically California, is substantially higher than the U.S. overall. The highest pace of wage growth is here in California. Highest in the nation right now. This place is on fire. That's one of the reasons why the easiest job in the state has got to be Gavin Newsom's. You talk about rolling in good times, the only thing he has to worry about is what don't I spend my money on, right? But I'll tell you what, one of the things that he has shown is he understands the minefield we are walking through fiscally. Look, yeah, money's good. 70% of this money comes from personal income taxes, which come from high-income earners. Hey, listen, I'm all for soaking the rich. Doesn't bother me a bit. But remember, this is the most volatile source of income. And if you want to see it in clear, when we had the stock market sell-off, revenues going to the DOF swooned. They were behind in February because of the stock market sell-off. Now, the stock market bounced back, and we're back above, you see the May revise, we're back above predictions. One stock market sell-off, and we went into a deficit with no economic slowdown. That should scare everybody in this room. So we need to have a real conversation about revenues in the state, but it's about revenue reform. Look, we're not a high-tax state. If you look at taxes collected as a share of GDP, it puts us right in the middle of the pack. We're not a high-tax state. We're a dumb tax state. We have excessively high taxes on small bases that are incredibly volatile, where we leave other parts of the state completely untaxed. Whether it's Prop 13 or oil extraction taxes, we have a really broken tax system. We need to fix it. We need to redo taxes. I hate this piecemeal, bit by bit, incremental. Well, we're going to have a split roll. Oh, and maybe we'll have a 1% service tax. No, fix it. Screw it. Just go Texas, you know? No income tax, 3% property tax. Roll it. Love it. It's a smart move. You can't do this incrementally. You've got to have the big change. You've got to do it quick because we're going to have a big problem. Well, hey, listen, the economy's on fire, fifth largest economy in the world, but it's all the Bay Area. That's what they told us a year ago when this happened. Almost all income growth and high-end job growth took place in Silicon Valley. Not quite. Look, Bay Area, man, you guys are the center of income. You're center of all this stuff. But that's true for most of California. Over the last 3 years, 1 million new full-time jobs in California. Of those 1 million new jobs, 550,000 pay over $100K a year. 55% of all new full-time jobs pay over $100,000 a year. That's not bad. 200,000 of those here in the Bay Area, 200,000 close to Southern California, 150,000 everywhere else. So there's a lot of people making good money out there, folks. And the numbers are good. But again, thinking from a long-term perspective, where's growth been in the state? Well, Bay Area is actually doing better. You're middle of the pack at 40% over the last 25 years. But of course, the inland areas, inland Northern California, including Sacramento, 52%. Inland Southern California over the last 25 years, 81%. The inland areas aren't falling behind. We heard that not too long ago from some of the folks in Sacramento, where they're going to have this thing called Regions Rising Together because the inland areas are so downtrodden. Actually, the inland areas, by far and away, are the fastest growing part of the state. Why? Again, labor force. It's not complicated. You have people, your population is growing, you can grow. That is how a full expansion economy works. And by the way, the reason the Bay Area's been doing better is because the Bay Area has actually started to build housing. And that's why, since the Great Recession came to the end, the fastest two growth economies in the state have been San Francisco, San Jose, then you have the Inland Empire, then you have the East Bay. Those are the top 4 major economies in the state. Pretty good numbers. And the data shows it. I can go through the accolades for the East Bay economy. East Bay and San Francisco, 15% growth and output over the last 5 years. Most of that information, durable goods manufacturing. You look here in the East Bay itself, almost 1.4 million employed residents, vastly more than ever before. Payroll employment recently hit 1.2 million in the East Bay. 1.2 million. Put that in context, back before the Great Recession, about 150,000 less. Never been higher, never more prosperous. What's grown over the last 5 years? Well, construction, 6.3% per year. Logistics is a big part, 4.7%. Manufacturing, 4.1% of the years. East Bay manufacturing is back in a big way. Information, 3.7%. Healthcare, leisure, and hospitality. On some sectors, not so much. Other education, retail, trade, not all sectors are rising together. Wages continue to rise. Wages here right now on average $73,000, substantially above the state, still decent growth rates. And again, information, professional services, manufacturing, some of the high numbers there. Median household incomes coming up all over the place. Median household income in California is $70,000, San Francisco $110,000, and Alameda and Contra Costa getting close to about $95,000 right now. Them's good numbers right there, no doubt about it. And I understand that incomes are lower in the East Bay than they are in the West Bay. But before you think that's an economic problem, you have to divide that a little more carefully. On the right-hand side is full-time worker incomes that I divided by level of education. And I'm comparing Alameda, Contra Costa, San Francisco, Santa Clara. You see the numbers. If you have less than a high school degree, you basically make the same wage no matter where you live. High school, no matter where you live. Even bachelor degrees, you actually make a little less here in the East Bay than you do in San Francisco, Santa Clara. So the only difference in incomes you're seeing between the East and West Bay is driven by a different composition of the labor force. Simple as that. There's no fundamental difference here. Once you control for education, the numbers look very, very similar. Airport's doing great, getting to 1.2 million passengers. Very, very solid numbers there. Hotel RevPAR, actually a very good year in first few months, up 8%. A RevPAR over last year at this point in time. And you have new hotels coming online, particularly here in Oakland, which is so desperately necessary. Great for the economy here. Good solid numbers there. International travel here keeps coming up. China has been a big part of that, which you got to worry about. But of course, there's other places too, Mexico, Germany, Canada, places like that. Port's been exporting kind of flat over the last few years. Is there a big threat from the China phenomenon? Well, most of the interaction between China and Oakland Port is really on the import side, not on the export side. And again, as already noted, I don't see that going back because they're going to make up for the tariffs in terms of overall depreciating yuan. So I don't think you need to worry too much about that. You're in good shape on that particular front. But good solid numbers there. Venture capital. Venture capital in 2018 was huge. Look at the numbers. Look how it exploded after a couple of years of being relatively flat. A big, big year last year. And what's interesting is, you know, California compared to the world is going down. That's shares. But California compared to the United States going up. So it's interesting. California is becoming more and more, in the Bay Area, more and more the center of venture capital investment here in the United States. But you are seeing more global competition for that venture capital funding, which is a long-term thing you need to be focused on. Because again, if you want that money to come here, you have to have an economy that's amenable to, of course, startup sort of investment. Now, the East Bay itself, again, the 2018 numbers, this is from PitchBook. We purchased this a few years back. And I just want you to focus on the left-hand side. What happened in terms of venture capital in the East Bay last year? Almost doubled from the previous year. Big, big numbers overall. A big increase, huge in healthcare, in particular in B2B. Those zoomed through the roof. Lots of new money pouring into the East Bay. A huge driver of potential job growth here. Another good sign, commercial permits are doing fine. And you can see better numbers here across the board. And East Bay in particular, again, 2018 was a record year. Alterations were about flat. Commercial came up just a little bit, but industrial had a big bounce. Office had a decent bump. And of course, hotels also had a very solid bump. Good signs, new investment moving here to continue to fuel this economy. We'll get there. What about the vacancy rates? How are they looking? Well, what's interesting, for all this new investment, for the most part, believe it or not, vacancy rates have actually been coming up. Why are vacancy rates coming up? Well, this gets to a bigger issue. And the bigger issue is this, overall job growth. California was at 3%. It is now below 1.5%. If you look at the numbers over here on the right side, look for the Oakland or MSA or the East Bay MSA. Last year was 1.9%. Now it's down to about 1.5%. So you do see slowing job growth here. And if you break it down just a little bit, here's the numbers over here on the left-hand side. This is for the East Bay overall. This is through the beginning of the year. And you can see admin support's doing okay. Professional services has slowed down some. Construction slowed a lot. Logistics is slowing. Everything's slowing. And where are they slowing? On the right-hand side, probably the more disturbing numbers, particularly for Contra Costa County. This is QCW through Q3 last year. And you can see Alameda's growing to 1.9%. Contra Costa basically has been flat for the last year. Uh-oh, what is going on? Well, the answer is a lack of workers. And that's not just here in the East Bay. It's the entire state of California. And that migration is paltry despite this incredibly hot economy. Labor force growth is worse than the U.S. at 0.9%. It's not going anywhere. And the result of that, unemployment is at a record low level. Unemployment in the state of California is at 4%, never been lower. On the right-hand side, every one of these economies has a record low unemployment rate, never been lower. This is a problem. I've been saying this for years. There's nothing new here. I pointed out to you 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I told you, there is going to be a wall. And that wall you're going to hit is driven by a basic physical law of nature, which is you cannot have more workers than people. Okay? You ran out of workers. When you run out of workers, you can't grow anymore. And that, of course, is driven by a lack of housing. You need 200 to 250,000 permits. The state's building 130,000. And let's not forget the 2 million backlog. And you see it in the numbers. Housing units per capita, second lowest in the nation. Multiple generations of family living together, one of the highest in the nation. We have a massive housing supply problem. A massive housing supply problem. It's a huge problem. Now you're like, hey, wait a minute. No, we have an affordable housing problem. We need more affordable housing. No. Wrong answer. You need more housing because more housing makes it affordable. That's a critically important point. Efforts to help affordability, rent control, inclusionary housing, subsidizing people's purchase of homes, all sounds nice, none of them fix the problem because all those efforts to help affordability hurt supply. And by hurting supply, you hurt affordability. You chase your own tail, you get nowhere. It's not a symmetric relationship. You help supply, that helps affordability. You focus on supply, you will fix the affordability problem. If you try and focus on affordability, you won't fix anything. And sadly, we continue to talk about a lack of affordable housing. No, drop the A. Housing, the lack of housing, simple as that. And you see it in the prices, we know they're up. You take a look at the unemployment rate here in the Bay Area, overall, you can see unemployment rate here. In East Bay, 3%. San Francisco, 2%. San Jose, 2.5%. Now, why have San Francisco and San Jose been so in front? Well, take a look at the right-hand side. This is labor force. This is the index of labor force growth. Typically, the East Bay has always been in front of labor force growth. Up till 2007 and 8, you were a small economy compared to San Jose and San Francisco 25 years ago. And I saw East Bay catch up, and then something stopped. And over the last 15 years, the East Bay has grown its labor force by a paltry 10%, 11%. Compare that to 20% for San Jose and 25% for San Francisco. Guess what? The West Bay got the message. You got to have housing. When you have housing, you grow your labor force. You grow your labor force, you grow your economy. Housing, housing, housing. Simple as that. Now, the numbers have been better, but again, it's largely driven by Santa Clara, which has had the most cumulative housing permits. Alameda is starting to catch up. Alameda is getting there. You see better numbers. You see those cranes out there. I'm excited. You need twice as many. That's a good start. That's all it is. Don't clap yourself in the back just yet. You need twice as many. Simple as that. Contra Costa is the one farthest behind, and they're the ones suffering the most. Because remember, it's not just that you're building housing for your economy, you're building it for everybody's economy. One of the biggest issues for Alameda and Contra Costa is over the last 5 or 6 years, half of all new housing built is being lived in by people who work in San Jose and San Francisco. So you've got to build twice as much housing because they can't keep up. So this is housing, housing, and housing. Yeah, I know rents are up. I know it's expensive out there. Vacancy rates are tight. But guess what? Because of income growth, affordability hasn't actually changed much. Median rent to household income has been largely steady in the Bay Area over the last decade. Actually, in San Francisco, it's becoming more affordable. Yes, San Francisco is one of the most expensive housing markets in the nation. Relative to incomes, it's actually one of the cheapest housing markets in California. Think of that. Think of that. So you do see gentrification. You see lower skilled people having to move out, higher skilled people moving in. This is the process that happens when you don't have enough housing. You can't stop this. Oh, you can't build market rate housing. Why not? Well, they just build it for rich people. So what? If you don't build a house for rich people, that rich person's going to go take a house from a lower income family. You got to build lots for everybody. If you don't, gentrification. And you can't stop it. You cannot stop it. The only solution to this issue is more housing, period. So build it. And things are better. Again, Alameda has been pretty good, but even as good numbers have good have been, they've slowed down in 2018. Costa's picking up, better numbers in 2018, but again, you need twice as much. So you got to keep up the pressure. You got to keep it forward. Now, I know why places don't build, particularly the small cities. And we all have to acknowledge this. You know, when you go to a city manager, you go, hey, I need you to build 300 affordable apartments in your town. They're looking at you as if you are a very bad person. Why? Well, not just because they got to get an earful from the NIMBYs, but you have to understand that every city in this state gets 80% of the revenues from their businesses and 80% of their expenses come from the residents. Every time they build that 300-unit apartment building, they put another nail in their fiscal coffin. So here's my shout out to Gavin Newsom. Here's my shout out to the state legislative bodies. I liked SB 50. I hope it passes next year. I like a lot of the stuff they're doing in terms of helping increase supply. But you know, I got little kids now. For those of you who don't know, I now have a family. I got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. I read a couple books. The books say you can't whip your children into being good people. And the state has to realize you can't whip your cities into being good cities. You can't punish them into doing the things they need to do. You have to incentivize them. Make it worthwhile for every city to want housing, and you know what? They'll build it. Change the incentives. Change the local tax structure. Go back to that term. We need to overhaul our tax system to incentivize the construction of housing. Go Texas. Cities get most of the revenues from property taxes there, and they build lots of housing. Simple as that. So, remember, it's not affordability, it's supply. You don't want to grow out, you want to grow up. Stop talking about the homelessness and a few low-income families. This is a broader supply crisis affecting everybody. Don't treat the symptoms, which is a problem with affordability. Treat the problem, which is a lack of supply. And remember, this is not an economic problem. I love San Mateo when they tell me, oh, you can't build any more in San Mateo. You can't possibly. We're built out. You can't build any housing in San Mateo. Are you kidding me? If you went Hong Kong and San Mateo, you could get the entire population of California in San Mateo. It's preposterous to say these things out loud, and yet people say it as if it's fait accompli. These are political issues. They are not economic ones. Simple as that. So, simple. It's going to be a good year. We have things great. Yes, there's some issues. Labor shortages, housing shortages, the Fed, equity markets, federal deficit, bank lending, political uncertainty, critical policy issues. But the biggest problem all is miserabilism. We have never had it so good, ever. And I mean we collectively. Everybody who has a smartphone in their pocket is vastly better off than anybody 15 years ago. Stop whining about how bad things are when they're not. Confront the real issues. Remember, it's not the number of jobs, it's the number of workers that matter. It's not who pays for health care, it's why are we paying so much. It's not tax levels, it's your tax structure. It's not income inequality, it's wealth inequality. It's not funded government liability, it's the unfunded stuff. It's not business investment, it's a lack of public investment. It's not inflation, it's slow bank lending. It's not the cost of housing, it's the supply of housing. You know, I was a teacher for a bunch of years. I learned something very simple. You don't ask the right question, you're never going to get the right answer. We're asking all the wrong questions. Have a great year. Have a great 2 years, but please, turn off the nonsense. No more weapons of mass distraction. Focus on the real questions. The solutions are easy, but you got to get there. You got to appreciate what we have to deal with the stuff we don't. Thank you very much. I'm way behind, I'm sorry.
Let's have another hand for Chris. Is he not amazing? I'm going to give you this. Now, I'm Contra Costa County Supervisor Candace Anderson. I am also the second vice president or vice chair of East Bay EDA. And at this time, I have a few questions that have been collected already, and we're not going to really stump the professor, but we're going to see your good response. I've had a couple of questions come in already. You've talked about a recession happens when we've got this great imbalance. People want to focus a little bit about our $1 trillion deficit. What is that going to do to really spur on this potential recession? And let's let you sit down. You sit down, I'll
Sure.
sit down, and we'll take some questions.
I could talk. I don't need a microphone. Okay. Again, I'm going to go back to the idea. There's two things that. Ow.
We've got a bright light.
Can you black the screen out? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay.
That's much better.
So there's two issues on the deficit I want to talk about, right? A deficit by itself won't create a recession until we have a debt crisis where the bond markets freak out a la Greece. And that is going to be a big, ugly period. It's not going to happen for 15 years minimum because net debt to GDP today is only about 72%. It's not that high. So we can go a number of years faking it until this gets serious. It will eventually. But here's the other thing I want you to think about. Yeah, we're running a $1 trillion a year deficit right now, right? $1 trillion of federal borrowing per year, which is a scary high number. But remember that most of that's already there. It's funny to me, all private sector companies have to take future liabilities into account on their balance sheet. If you offer your workers these great pensions, you have to put that as a liability on your balance sheet. Do you know who doesn't have to do that? The federal government. Why? Because they get to write the rules. That's why. Why is that critical? I'll tell you why. You know, every time you see another $1 trillion in borrowing, remember, a lot of that is just taking our unfunded liabilities and turning them into a funded liability. You're just taking money out of this ledger and you're putting it in this ledger. The net debt situation really hasn't changed all that much. Look, right now in the U.S., on a net basis, we have, something on the order of about $14 trillion in federal debt. We have unfunded liabilities in the, $60 trillion range. So every time you take $1 trillion out of this column, you put $1 trillion in this column, you haven't really changed anything, except for you've actually forced the government to acknowledge that that debt actually exists. So think of it in the right way.
It's not going to trigger the recession, is what you're telling us.
Not for 15 years.
Oh, not for 15
Not
years.
For 15
Okay.
years. Sorry,
so
that was a long answer. Keep going. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
next one, a question about how buying a home, Bay Area average price is about $1.3 million. We're expecting people to also save enough for retirement. How do you see that impacting the economy?
Well, what you see happening, again, it's not a price phenomenon. People who are buying homes in the Bay Area today have substantially higher incomes than people who are buying homes in the Bay Area 5 years ago, and 10 years ago, and 15 years ago. You know, we always say, no one could afford those homes. Who could afford that price? By the way, that price was registered because someone afforded it. Remember, that's a real transaction. And you don't see people doing this with debt. This is real money being put on the table to buy these homes at these crazy prices because there's not enough homes. So what does happen? Gentrification. Lower skilled people are getting pushed east. And the businesses that hire those folks are also getting pushed east. There are a lot of companies in the mid-level of range of things that are moving up the 80 because they can't afford to operate in the Bay Area. So you're creating a mass dislocation, and what you're ending up with, of course, is Country Club California. It's like, you remember you used to go to the amusement park when you were a kid and they'd have a sign, you must be this tall to get on this ride? Well, what you're doing in the Bay Area, you're saying, is you must be this rich to live in the Bay Area. And yeah, that is tough for a lot of folks. But unless you build more housing, that's not going to get any better. So buy the house. If you can afford it, buy it. It's not going to go down in price, I'll tell you that.
Okay, the next question is one you probably haven't encountered. This is someone who serves on a wastewater district. So he's concerned. He's got a number of flushers whose average income is about $50,000 per year. They have serious infrastructure needs. They've got to replace their pipes. They've got to do other things. What is the answer when you have a population that can't really afford to maintain their infrastructure by raising fees and taxes?
Well, right off the bat, we have to be really cautious because I don't know where that $50,000 number came from.
Okay.
The numbers I looked at were substantially higher and growing substantially faster. So the answer is, obviously, there's money there to make these investments. And we all have to understand that making infrastructure investments in our economy is an important way of growth and developing, keeping our environment clean and everything else? The answer is you just got to suck it up and find some money and do it. I mean, that's just it. You just got to do it. And you got to figure out where their revenues are. And you got to understand why the revenues aren't there in the first place. Why are cities and counties strapped for cash in the midst of one of the hottest economies on the planet? And the answer, of course, is our bizarre tax structure. You know, go to Sacramento. You need tax reform. You need to give local governments more tools to raise the monies they need to do the things they need to do. And constraining them with ridiculousness like, oh, you can't have local income taxes, and you can't do anything with property taxes, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. Stop. Stop. Look, we have to have a conversation about how the tax system in California is creating so many problems, both cyclically and structurally. We got to fix it. But that means somebody in Sacramento standing up and saying things have to change. And man, there's one thing that Californians hate, is change.
Okay, let's talk cannabis. We haven't talked cannabis today. We have in the East Bay a lot of legal cannabis businesses. Is it too early for us to really see the impact on the East Bay or statewide?
No.
What do you think is going to happen? Okay.
I'm sorry, what was the question? Anyway.
And we won't ask
Yeah,
you
it's
where
the
you were
oldest-
before you
oldest
came to
cannabis
today's
trend.
meeting.
Look,
Yeah.
cannabis has been so overblown as a driver of economic growth. It's great that it's legal, but come on, it's not the be-all, end-all. And I get tired of people thinking you could just raise gazillions of dollars, have millions. You can't. People, if people smoked that much weed, nothing would happen in the Bay Area, okay? The only economies that would be flourishing are donut shops and pizza shops, okay? And taco trucks, thank you very much. Nothing else would be going on. It's just not that big of an economic driver. You need to find a different way of raising those revenues. Legalize heroin. I hear that's a good market. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, and now here's a little bit more of a serious question. So this viewer, this audience member, appreciates your comments that life is better than it was in 1973 for
and
us.
1983 and 1993 and 2003.
And so their question is, what about the person who doesn't have a college education, who's in a service job, minimum wage, can't afford a house, where back in 1973, minimum wage, basic job, they probably had a place to live.
No, they didn't.
Okay, so you don't think they
that-
did.
that-
That's the fallacy.
It's amazing to me that we fetishize this past where people on minimum wage in 1973 could buy a house and have a fancy car. No, they couldn't. They lived in dire poverty back then. It's less dire poverty today. You know, look, people are getting ahead. Everybody's getting ahead. Everybody has the benefits of a smartphone, no matter what level of education you have. Now, again, I get it. It's tough being on the low end of the skill list and the income distribution. There's no doubt about it. But things have improved even for that population. And we wanted to improve more. The best way of doing that, by the way, is building more housing so they can afford somewhere to live. And by the way, fixing our education system so their kids get to go to college. These are the investments you need to make. But sitting around pretending that people on a minimum wage had a great life in 1973, you're living a myth. You're living a lie. That world didn't exist.
Okay, thank you. The last question, we're running out of time. We've had a lot of natural disasters, particularly the fires. What economic impact do you see that?
Fires are intriguing, right? I mean, they're scary stuff. We know there's a lot of parts of the state that are exposed to this. We understand the situation is going to get worse, given what we understand about global warming. It's something to be scary about. Right. But here's the key to disasters. They don't create recessions. They don't change economic growth. Disasters are short periods of time which have tragic human consequences, and within a year they have zero economic footprint. Zero. They just fade away. With some exceptions. Paradise will be an exception because of both the nature of the people who are displaced and how dramatic it was. But here is the upside of potential disasters. Sonoma, a couple of years ago, lost an enormous amount of housing, particularly in Santa Rosa. It was tragic. People died, people lost their homes, they lost their memories, and yeah, I mean, it makes you want to cry. But at the back end of that, Sonoma has passed one of the most aggressive housing development plans in the state. Density bonuses, height bonuses, special zones to build, taking away permits, getting rid of restrictions, telling people, we want you to come here and build. Every disaster has a silver lining if you know how to spin it right. Sonoma has taken that and run with it, and everybody in the state should look at what they're doing and think about how can we replicate that. Because again, the issue in California, why do all those people live out there in the woods? Because people in San Mateo don't want anything over 2 stories.
That's true.
So again, economy's great. The problems are obvious. They haven't changed a bit. We just have to get past these inherent issues we have with change. The world changes. You know, the Bay Area today doesn't look like the Bay Area 20 years ago. And it doesn't look like the Bay Area 20 years before that or 20 years before that. The world changes. You adapt to change, you adapt with change, you embrace change, and you make change work for you. But to sit around and say, I'm going to freeze the world in some pretend nirvana circa 1998 or 2013 is preposterous. So grow up, do the right thing.
Yep. And thank you, Chris. Always good. And now we are going to present Chris with a gift, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to Ed Del Beccaro, who is our first vice chair of East Bay EDA.
So in 1973, I was in college and a dishwasher and a bartender, so that wasn't as good. Okay, so it's my pleasure, Ed Del Beccaro, vice chair of EDA, to introduce our next speaker. Anish Raman, I hope I'm saying it right, is Senior Advisor on Strategy and External Affairs at the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. Raman has spent the last 5 years in the tech industry, mostly as head of economic and social impact at Facebook. We want to hear about that. From 2009 to 2013, Anish held multiple positions in the Obama administration, including acting as a domestic policy speechwriter to President Obama, and also as speechwriter, very interesting here, to Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner during the historic recession. Anish started his career as a CNN correspondent, first in Southeast Asia and then in the Middle East, where he spent over a year in Iraq as a war correspondent. He's a graduate of Harvard. Anish is a former Fulbright scholar, current Fulbright scholar, team member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and is a member of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library New Frontier Award Committee. Please welcome Anish.
Thank you. I think with that intro, I could spend the whole time just saying we need to build more housing, which the governor agrees with, and I think if we just did that, we'd be doing something. I am here on behalf of the governor, who is in Sacramento today, speaking to the California Chamber, on behalf of his chief economic advisor, Lenny Mendoza, and we are here because we see all of you, all across the state, as key partners in our strategy to build inclusive and sustainable growth in California. As you heard, we have a lot to be proud of when it comes to the California economy. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. We lead in so many key areas: manufacturing, technology, trade. California products go to over 200 countries and territories around the world. We have new businesses start here at a faster rate than anywhere else. The venture capital investment is higher here than anywhere else. I think the stat I just saw was over 50% of venture capital investment in the country was in California since 2010. So we have a lot to be proud of, but we also do face some significant headwinds. We have a cost crisis. It means for a lot of working Californians, no matter how hard they work, they're still falling behind. That's a cost crisis principally around housing, but also healthcare and education, and you've seen the governor talk a good amount about that. We are at once the richest and poorest state in America. 8 million Californians, 1 in 5, live below the poverty line. 1 in 5 children in California live below the poverty line. We have staggering levels of wealth and income inequality. And then we have disruptions coming, whether it's globalization or technology, that are going to change the nature of work and could threaten to exacerbate a lot of those divides. So we really have a moment here where we have to both shore up what's strong about our economy, but also address some of the key challenges that we face. That starts with what we see as inclusive growth. addressing the cost crisis, 3.5 million new homes by 2025. That's a supply issue, I agree, and something that we're pushing to get done. It's not just on us. It was not good to see what happened with SB 50, and I think all of us all across the state need to stay focused on that issue and continue to keep up the pressure on everyone in Sacramento. You've seen healthcare be a big focus for the governor. He just had a healthcare tour last week, talking about the costs that exist for Californians. And education is one that we're going to tackle as well. We have launched an initiative called Regions Rise Together with Lenny Mendoza, the Chief Economic Advisor, and Kate Gordon, who is the head of the Office of Planning and Research, where we're going to really look at inland communities and trying to get more inclusive growth across the state. Since 2010, 70% of job growth in California has been in LA, San Francisco, Bay Area, and San Diego and surrounding areas, and that's disproportionate to population. So we've got to get more growth going in Fresno and Stockton and Modesto and Riverside. And so we're kicking off an initiative that will reach its major next checkpoint in November at the California Forward Economic Summit, when the governor will be there with some ideas and a strategy for how we have more inclusive growth across the state. Now, that's not to say that inequality doesn't exist in coastal communities, including here in Oakland, and so that's one of the issues as I talk about the cost crisis that we're trying to address. And the third thing on inclusive growth is making sure that California remains competitive. So that starts with making sure that the California government is easier to deal with. There's a great example I like to point to out of Riverside, where they recognized just the complexity of permitting and licensing was too cumbersome, and so they brought in some consultants from Disney to actually make it a more user-friendly customer experience. They mapped all the different bottlenecks. They found, for example, that to get a solar panel on your roof, you have to have 7 different visits. So they've streamlined a lot of that. They brought in a happy or not score, just like Amazon uses, and now they're at 97% just by making the process easier. I think their tagline was building with certainty, just trying to bring more clarity and certainty to the process for business. So that's a prototype we're looking at. That's the type of example that we're looking at as we look across the state and even with the state government, ways we can be easier to work with. I would also say that our budget resiliency is a key part of keeping California competitive. 87% of the budget that the governor put forward are non-recurring costs. It's a big pay down into the rainy day fund. We want to make sure that no matter what's coming, we're ready. And a lot of that ties into, again, this idea of 2 Californias that exists, because when we do have a downturn, the things that get cut most immediately are services that are going to those who are least off. That's inclusive growth, so that's what I would say is more short term. Longer term is what we're saying is sustainable growth. So if we want to make sure the economy works for everyone today, we want that to be true for future generations. And as the governor sees it, we have 2 defining challenges of our time in this state: climate change and the future of work. Climate change is becoming an increasing reality for us. That is both about resilience. How do we not just manage climate change as it starts to create wildfires and things we have to react to, but prepare for those things in a better way, plan for those things in a better way. But also, how do we help lead our economy into a clean energy economy? And one of the data points I'm most proud of for us is that electric vehicles are now our 7th biggest export as a state. So that specific area, but green mobility generally, is a great industry for us as a state to kind of shore up and to lead the way on. On the other side is future of work. So you saw the governor sign an executive order launching a Future of Work Commission that is going to kick off shortly. Commissioners will be named shortly. This is going to be a very real endeavor. The explicit goal of this commission is to not do something that is redundant, is to not do something that is just a report, is to not exist and then be forgotten a few months after it ends. It's meant to be additive and actionable. And so you'll see that bias across everything we do, whether it's the governor, Lenny, or I. We're coming to get things done, and we're coming to get things done quickly. We come with humility, with a desire to partner, but also with urgency. And that will be true for the Future of Work Commission, which will look across both the supply and demand side of labor. We've got myself and Lenny, as well as the labor secretary and the governor's senior advisor for higher education, involved in planning that group, and that's purposeful, that's deliberate, to make sure that we have all relevant communities represented, and we're able to tackle this issue from all vantage points. So that's one that I would keep an eye on. A big marker for us, again, will be this November summit, November 7th and 8th in Fresno, the Economic Summit in California. We plan to come there with a strategy going into next year, ideas on how the state can do more to support development in regions and in cities. And we hope that in advance of that, you have me and Lenny as key partners to give us ideas, to give us feedback, to let us know what's working, what's not. You may have worked with the office before. Our shorthand has been GoBiz, Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. In the legislature right now is a name change proposition to Office of Economic Impact, and that's deliberate as well. We want to be thinking about the economy overall, and we want to be thinking about impact, not just planning and development. And so, again, we do that in partnership with you. You have an open door now, a team that is ready and willing to engage, but one that is urgently trying to get to actions and solutions that are data-based. And so I hope that you reach out to us. I hope you remember who you've got in office. The governor was an entrepreneur, started his career that way, brings that thinking to his office every day. I've been in 3-4 meetings with him this week, and it's a very private sector analytical mindset. Lenny spent decades at McKinsey, stood up the San Francisco office, has advised every Fortune 500 company you can think of, and brings to this job that kind of thinking. I have background in tech, but I'd say the most important thing that shapes my day-to-day is I'm a child of immigrants. My dad came here February 4th, 1971 from India, left everything and anyone he knew behind, $8 in his pocket, and came here because here was uniquely the place where anything was possible. That is the definition of the American dream. Work hard, get ahead. It's what has defined us throughout, and it is at risk now. And I've been to places. My career at CNN took me to Iraq, took me to Iran, took me across the Middle East, where people just like us, as smart, as driven as us, had 0% chance of making something with their life. The hurdles that they faced were literally insurmountable. And it broke my heart to see that. And as I came back, joined the Obama campaign, was at Treasury during the financial crisis, seeing the fault lines that existed in our economy, realizing over time as I went to write for the president that there are communities and growing communities in America where that is true. You look at this generation and their chances of being better off than their parents are lower than generations before. I think going back to as far as the data tracks, that's shameful, that's un-American, and that gets at the core of who we are as a country. And so since then I've been devoting my career to trying to revive the American dream. That's taken me to tech, social impact startups that were focused on that, and then to Facebook, heading up economic impact policy. And I think that technology has a really important role to play, but we are at such an extreme moment of inequality that there really needs to be some policy answers, and there has to be at the core a partnership with the private sector. The governor, Lenny, myself, we're capitalists. We believe so firmly in the importance of the private sector in bringing economic mobility across the state, but we've got to come at it with that sort of urgency and with that sort of mindset about the challenges. And so that's what shapes our work every day. And so I hope that we can find a way to partner, a way to work together, know that you've got a governor and a team in the, hopefully soon, new Office of Economic Impact that are here to listen. We want to get stuff done. We've got our priorities, but we know that those are different or more nuanced as you go to each different region and as you go to cities. And so we want to visit, we want to talk, and then we want to act. And so I hope you can hold us accountable to that and hold us accountable to doing so in a smart way. Thank you.
I want to thank Anis for being here. He's always been accessible. We've had a lot of contact with you and the office when you were at the White House, especially around tech issues. And so we look forward to that continued relationship in your new position. And we've had a systemic relationship with Lenny Mendoza over the 20-plus years. And we've already had contact with him in his new position as well. So we look forward to East Bay EDA having an even tighter relationship with the office. Thank you very much for being with us today. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy day. Just before we break up, I want to make sure you pick up the material that's on the back. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us in terms of what's going on within East Bay EDA. For those who want additional information about the organization, please touch bases with any of our members that are present. We would encourage you to consider being an active member of this organization, because being an active member of this organization helps to keep our community in the best position that it could possibly be. Again, thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you at some of our future events. We're adjourned for today. Thank you very much.